Okay, a very quick synopsis is that, and I learned so much of this from Preston Nichols, and is that the Philadelphia experiment was a experiment in 1943, which was the culmination of many years of research when the Navy was trying to make a destroyer escort appear invisible to radar because of all the ships that were sinking American ships, merchant ships, and this experimentation involved the degaussing or the demagnetizing rather of the ship, and this was coincident with the ship disappearing and it actually moving back into time or forward into time. We don't know where. I don't know the exact dates it moved to. This experiments caused a great deal of trauma to the crew. Research was done primarily at Camp Upton, which is now Brookhaven National Laboratories. And this was figuring out the mind of man and what made it tick and how come when it went into time displacement, it became distorted. Humans became distorted, their bodies, their minds, their spirits. So this research carried on at MonTauk eventually, at first at Brookhaven, and then it went to MonTauk where they were successfully connecting up people to the radio frequency, and they would amplify the radio frequency, and where thoughts could come out on a computer or they could come out into the ether, so to speak. And this is what the MonTauk project was in a nutshell, in a very brief nutshell. Well, as with everything when you get into the super secrets sector, it has there's a multiplicity of purposes and functions. And the initial reason to go out to MonTauk was that it had this huge radar transmitter that produced 435 or thereabouts megahertz, which Preston Nichols will tell you is the window frequency to the human consciousness. And therefore, they wanted this transmitter to function at the human consciousness, level of human consciousness, so that it could affect people's minds. So it is verifiable and has been demonstrated on video, including that animals and even people will react to the amplification of radio frequency at that wavelength or a harmonic of that wavelength, which is included with the cell phones. I think cell phones are twice that. But basically, we've seen animals going crazy around MonTauk. And of course, there were many stories during the project of, deer running into a phone booth, deer crashing into a cafe where they used to have a picture of it on the cafe. It was actually illustrated by an artist. So there was a lot of crazy behavior that took place with people in that area. Yes, and Brookhaven Labs was where microwave research was taking place. That was sort of spawned so much, if not all, of the microwave research that occurred, at least in the United States. So to the best of my knowledge, that's not quite correct. It would most likely and is believed to, according to Preston Nichols, and he's not the only one, originated at Plum Island. Plum Island is a beautiful, gorgeous island, which I've had the unique experience of actually being on it, courtesy of the Rotary Club. They were taking us out there to show us that there was nothing going on there, even though there's like $365 million a year budget, which they admitted. And certain areas of the island you can't go on to, including the director of the island saying, I wasn't allowed to go anywhere by myself until being after here for a year. And he says, of course, that's until you have top secret security. I mean, excuse me, and he kind of like had to cover his mouth on the top security. But Plum Island, now Lyme disease was actually originally called, and you can find this on the internet, MonTauk knee. It was called MonTauk knee because people's knees would swell up in sort of a inflamed arthritis. Now, Lyme disease is, of course, morphed into all sorts of different types of maladies. And I do know of a woman, the only person I've ever met that's been cured outright of Lyme disease, and she did not do this through the medical profession. She did it through the practice of Qigong. She's one of my fellow Qigong students. She was on her deathbed, And this was through breathing, just ordinary, not ordinary, but unique Qigong breathing. She actually recovered to a full state of health. That's the positive bit of news. But that answers your question, Plum Island, and then it was called MonTauk because people at there's a lot of deer. And even there's more super secret stuff in back of this, because Preston Nichols researched this when he got Lyme disease. And basically what it was is they were trying to put a biological weapon into something that could survive an atom bomb. So when they dropped an atom bomb on Japan, there's a lot of deer in Japan, including in the Emperor's Garden. So they put a deer tick. They found out a deer tick could survive an atom bomb. And they would put the syphilis, basically the spirochete virus, which is essentially syphilis, into the deer tick, so that it would the bomb would not only happen, it would infect the population. So this is, and then of course it showed up at MonTauk because it's just across the ocean a short distance. And the name MonTauk was changed to Lyme disease, in part, I think, to distract people from looking into MonTauk, where they did other biological experiments. Well, there's been at least three. I think a fourth one has come up lately. There was this weird animal that showed up on the coast of Long Island, and it was mysteriously skirted away, because I knew a woman whose friend had it show up on her, beach or backyard or something like this, or the backyard of the beach. I don't remember the exact story, but basically and then she became very funny about it. People would respond. When I went to Plum Island, that's all the people, he said, that people in the press wanted to ask him about the Montauk monster. And they had this really funny theory about it, which they said it was a dog, it was this, it was somebody called it a raccoon. And they had all of these funny descriptions or excuses for what it was. And it just didn't add up. And there are other similar beasts that showed up. One on the north shore of Long Island. I think they were both and one in Canada. And of course, in both cases, they were skirted away. I reported them on my newsletter. I have a quarterly newsletter for those who are interested at my other website, skybooks.usa.com. So I've written on these things in the past, but I think it's just strange phenomena. I don't think it's an ordinary carcass. MonTauk Indians told me when I told her about it, she says, these things are not new to us. They've always existed. And so they don't flinch at them. They just say, okay, they're from another realm, like your Loch Ness monster sort of phenomena, this type of thing. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it certainly coincides with the weird things they do at Plum Island, the secret things they do there. So much of what they put their attention on is the modification of the weather, which was from day one, which has morphed into the HARP project. Now, if you listen to Revolution Radio, Douglas Dietrich, he's one of the most interesting characters to come along the pike in the conspiracy realm, because he's talked about the HARP project being used to bind demons. This is one of its purposes. It has multiple purposes. The original purpose, he said, at least as far as the Alaskan end of it, was to reverse the Japanese current, which the Japanese current they could send balloons over in a very short amount of time to come and do warfare on the United States via balloon. This was done in the 40s. And so they was originally to reverse the current, because you can't go to America so quick to Japan from America. You can go to Japan to America very quick. But the Japanese were smart enough, because was it Hirohito, the emperor, was a marine biologist. He was a PhD. And it would come down all the way down to Peru and back to Japan. But the Americans hadn't figured out this current. They didn't know this at the time. So that was the initial one. But then it gets into a part of where they're also trying to bind demons in addition to other fun games they do with it. I could explain it better. But basically, electronics control spirits. This is what I learned in Dianetics and Scientology, was the whole underlying thesis of so much of what L. Ron Hubbard had to offer his patrons was that spiritual beings could be controlled electromagnetically. And this is, of course, what we now know as psychotronics, introduced into the world by Ingo Swann, a former Scientologist and remote viewer, and who I didn't really know, but I certainly knew him, and he used to kind of spy on me. But this was so electromagnetics and spirits. In other words, a spirit can be trapped electromagnetically. So when we're dealing with all of these radio frequencies, and of course, Preston Nichols would have told you the same thing. Everything I learned from Preston Nichols was sort of an outgrowth of what I learned in Dianetics and Scientology with regard to electromagnetic interfacing with human beings. So when you have the Heart Project, you have an extreme, I guess what you call evolved technology of manipulation, manipulating weather, and manipulating the weather is the moods. You can just watch people's moods change with the weather. So when you tie all of these things together, this is very sophisticated research that is very, I guess what you call experimented on and esoteric. So, but the idea of binding a spirit and whether they're doing, he learned this at Sonoma State University. It would make sense, at least 50%, at least. Yes, because the computers were very much a part of the early MonTauk research and interfacing computers with the mind of man and with the radio technology. So yes, it would make sense that computers are connected to it. The entire behemoth we know as the internet. And then some of the other books that I published and collaborators that I've dealt with have dealt with the highest level of computing, which sort of went beyond where at least anybody was publicly acknowledging the knowledge had went to. This ties into the work of John Dee, which I know, Hillary, you're familiar with, and the meta machine is mentioned and discussed in my book, Synchronicity and the Seventh Seal. The collaborator being referred to was Joseph Matheny. He created a meta machine which was sort of outdid any of the existing computers as far as human knowledge knows. I mean, there might be stuff that's more sophisticated in the secret sector. Okay, David Anderson first subscribed to my newsletter, the MonTauk Pulse. That's how I knew of his existence. Then he walked into one of the monthly meetings we used to have on Long Island. We called MonTauk Night. He appeared there, and that's where I actually met him in person on the night of the big eclipse of August 11th, 1999. And he said he would like to work with me. And we slowly began to collaborate. He had just returned from Romania. He wanted me to go to Romania, but it took like 9 years to get me there, to actually where I arrived in Romania. In the meantime, I had a Romanian publisher who offered me a book on Romania to publish, not on Romania, but about secret computer technology, holographic computer technology that was in the mountains buried beneath the ground of Romania, where there's a Romanian Sphinx. And of course, David brought me over there in 2008, where I began to interface with Romanians. And I've been going to Romania once a year since then and investigating and researching. And of course, David, I kind of was telling what he was doing in my life. Well, I didn't really mention he was a time travel scientist. Excuse me. He was a time travel scientist who had a laboratory on Long Island where he could make time slow down and speed up the size of a soccer ball. And then by the time a few years later, it was the size of a basketball. Now, Hillary, I know you interviewed him about 2010 or thereabouts. And by that time, he was sending humans into, he was big enough to take a human on. So humans could be subject to experiments in time. And he's a very interesting character, a very mysterious character. The last time I saw him in person was in 2010, sometime around when you did your interview, as he did a few interviews. And he showed us a video of his time reactor, an early version where it showed a plant that would normally take 4 days to grow. It would do that growth in 3 minutes. So we saw that. There was 20 of us who saw that, or about thereabouts 20, and it was a very fascinating thing. So I interviewed him this June. He had not appeared in my life except very sporadically through my association with the World Genesis Foundation, which he founded, and I'm now one of the board members. And he would sometimes appear, but he would only talk like very matter-of-factly, nothing of interest regards to time. And of course, he called me in January and eventually agreed to do a podcast, which is on the website, digitalmontauk.com, podcast number 8. We talked for over 3 hours about the latest developments. The most interesting things I got out of him in that particular interview were, one, that he has now patented proprietary technology that can cause one to go into this boundary layer, go through the boundary layers of time, a time bubble. I call it a bubble for lack of a better word. If you have an area that's slowing down time or speeding it up, and you go from that area to outside of it, you're going to get scorched like they did in the Philadelphia experiment. It has to do with radiation that appears, and it has to do with the Doppler effect, where you've got one frequency and a different frequency. So now he has a technology which enables you to actually literally walk through that time barrier. I asked him if it was like a skin diver suit. He said, no, I don't know if it's a device or if it's an actual something you wear. Don't really know, but he couldn't really discuss it. I got that out of him. And I also got that, because I go to Romania, I got out of him that there was a huge discharge of what's called space-time motive force. This is when you have two bodies that are basically moving at a different time rate, such as the Earth and the Moon. You could have it. They're moving at a different time rate, which they're not. There will be a discharge of space-time motive force. And he's explained this on some videos, which are linked. If you go to my website, you will find them, where he explains how you can harvest cheap energy for the Earth, from the space-time displacement of the Earth. So basically what he said, there was a huge discharge of space-time motive force either 200 or 2,000 years ago in this cave in Romania known as Choclobina Cave, which was noteworthy because I had been there the previous summer. Mm-hmm. And this was, wow. He was really surprised that I'd been in that cave because I've written books about Romania and whatnot. And it's right in the area where the books that I've published have told of these very strange stories with time phenomena. He was working for Bosch Industries in Rochester. But he was working for Bosch. He was developing biosensor technology for the security industry, and it was very high level. And then he went back in 2000, I think it was 9, he created Anderson Multinational. And Anderson Multinational was the parent company for different companies, one of which was the Anderson Institute. You can look up andersoninstitute.com, where it's all about time travel, and this is his time travel research. But that's not the government per se, mm-hmm. But when you're in that business, the government will come to you and tell you what you can and can't do. Now, there's a patent he has on a time reactor, and I had that once on my website. It disappeared. I don't know how. And then, so I countered that by putting it into my most recent book, The White Bat, which was published last year. And chapter 7 has a whole copy of the time reactor. And the time reactor the patent was registered. It's got the registration number and everything, but it was sequestered by the US government, which means that you have to have special access to see it if you're in the government, or you can look at the book. Or if I put certain things on my website and they get taken off. So it's frustrating to keep putting them back on. The only unfortunate thing about my books, I write about David Anderson through more or less 4 or 5 books, the Transylvania series. I haven't had time to consolidate it all into one book on him, which I would hope to do at some indeterminate point in the future. Well, this is very interesting because the future and the past and the present are all connected. They're all connected. They always were. The question is, we're stuck. and we're unsticking as a culture. Well, I mean, just like in a human state, you're stuck in a body. You're kind of trapped in a body. So as a culture, we were very stuck in certain ideas. And now the culture is such that we're open to the idea of time travel. We're not very intelligent about it. We're not very experienced about it as a culture. There are isolated cases of individuals, and some people would say, oh, it goes on all the time. It's happening all the time. Well, these people may be accurate from their own perspective, but it's not culturally accurate, and they can't integrate their experiences into the culture. And this is where the only reason, I think that I have to offer in this field is that I try to integrate the nuts and bolts of it from whatever limited access I have to characters like David Anderson. So I'm very interested in the science and the grounding of it. But yes, so and then when I was talking about this metamachine computer, this is basically generating synchronicity. And synchronicity means time together, or it's just the synthesis of time. So yes, the computer is going to be connected through its crystal property structure, even when the people programming the computer don't necessarily know this. Now, there's a very interesting radio host out in San Francisco, Alex Studer, and he has interviewed me a few times, but when I've talked to him privately, he's talked about this computer out in Utah. I don't know if you know anything about this huge computer out in Utah. Hillary, you familiar with it? Well, I would imagine, I think it's underneath Granite Mountain, I think they call it. And it's basically a huge database. I mean, we talk about terabytes, and I forget what goes above a terabyte, but we're talking in those type of bytes. And because it's supposedly got data on everybody. And this, now the interesting part about this book that I published, The Mystery of Egypt by author Radu Sinamar, is talks about them going and retrieving archives underneath the Giza Plateau through the tunnels in Romania. They access the Giza Plateau through these superdimensional tunnels, and they go to they retrieve all these archives. They're sort of like a CD or slate, maybe like a tracking pad on the, but they'd be bigger than this and thicker. And see that tracking pad on the iMac. But anyway, it would be bigger, and then it would read out a holographic scape of time, like for, I don't know, it was thousands of years or hundreds of years. And they had all these, and they were storing them and bringing back to Washington, D.C., to the Pentagon. And I'm thinking, like, what are they going to do with these things? And I first envisioned people like, taking whatever you have on staff and then taking people saying, okay, look at this disk and take notes on it. Because you got to have people to, well, then I realized this is a little ridiculous. It's not going to work. And I eventually realized that if they had this data on disk, they would take it to a place like this place in Utah, where they're going to figure out a way to download it and put it on a computer. They become literal time archives. The concept of time archives first occurred in my research when Preston Nichols told me about Alsace-Lorraine mountains in France. There were time archives there, but as there are in Romania and in different other places. But then I realized if the government is taking all of these time archives and putting them there, it's like a Trojan horse from the people who originally put these things in from Romania, these ancient civilization. So yes, you have an interaction of the two past and the time, and how it all plays out, as I say, is where we're sitting here in this stuck zone. This stuck, that's I never really think of them reverse engineering, because I think they're kind of the technology so far ahead that there's an interface between the two. I don't know if reverse engineering, I mean, it may not be wrong, but it's just sort of, there's this bouncing back and forth, and this bouncing back and forth between the two, so for an ancient culture and current secret government culture, is sort of a dance that's happening, and we're the ones that aren't in on it, because we're walking around as citizens, and citizens are generally the last one to find out what's going on. And then how do they integrate citizens? And then where do citizens fit in as a feeding source for some form of demonic energy. This is part of the theme of Douglas Dietrich's work that he exposes, having to do with feeding demons. Part of this good and dark agenda is harvesting energy and whatnot. I think what your personal adversary is, and one of the biggest mistakes people make is fighting things external to themselves, fighting things that external that really they'd best be looking to their own issue. So Satanism is a big distraction. At the same time, it's a factor that one has to notice and deal with, and not necessarily avoid, but is that the game that one wants to play? When we talk about the high level of, there's a satanic chaplain in the U.S. Army. Dietrich used to be a liaison for him in the Defense Department because that was his job, and he was, this guy wrote a satanic chaplain's handbook for the Army, because there's a lot of Satanists in the Army, and you can't deal with them if you're the chaplain as a Christian, or as if they're a Jew or some other religion. So this is a factor in the military. So what do they have their fingers in things? Yes. Do they have their fingers in everything? Not really. They don't have control. If they had control, it would be a blazing hell on earth instead of just a sort of a purgatory. So it has its place. And then there's all this, it's sort of part of the archetype that's built into the drama of the human situation. You have a negative, the evil, the dark, and the light, and this goes back to yin and yang. Well, I think it's already sort of here. I mean, the computer technology is here. It will continue to interface and crossbreed with more of the phenomena that's a part of the universe. But it's very interesting I feel prompted to mention this. In my second book, MonTauk Revisited, which talks all about the occult correspondences with the MonTauk Project that lead me into a letter correspondence with Amato Crowley, the bastard son of Aleister Crowley. This stirred up a lot of energy with magical people that work in the secret realms. And see, Amato, I had a friendly correspondence with him, and he wrote some incredibly interesting books about his father, but he was a little problematic, I would find. And anyway, what happened is, this is very interesting. I had, they wanted to import his books into the United States, and they asked me that I would import them and sell them. I was very happy to do this. But then I was called by the person who was paying for the publishing costs, and his name was Steve Anthony. And I said, well, the only thing I wanted, I think I wrote to him after we talked about the prospect, I wanted to have my base covered at customs, because at customs at the JFK airport in New York, they do all sorts of outrageous and egregious things at times. So if you agree on a price, and they say, well, you're going to have to pay $200 for this box of books, it doesn't make them sellable. So being very diligent about this, I was, asking my P's and Q's, and I couldn't get my P's and Q's answered. So I didn't act on it. Had I acted on it, I would have been able to sell the books. But when you're dealing with an occult energy like this book, it can set off a lot of flames. So anyway, I kept trying to get hold of Steve Anthony because he never answered my question. When I asked about the P's and the Q's, like there's an old saying that it's okay to drink with the devil as long as you make him pay for the drinks. And I was not going to pay for the drinks here. And anyway, I didn't recognize Steve Anthony as the devil, but he was doing the son of the devil's work, so to speak, by doing this book. So I tried, and I finally had this British guy who went over and knocked on the door of Elan Computing, which is where he worked. And he was like, he couldn't get through it. He was like, he had to knock. He was having to get this occult force. And he finally told him what he was there for. What do you want to know for? What do you want to know for? And this sort of like British bullshit, they'll say, like, what do you know to know for? And he says, well, and he just And then I had somebody who traced down Diamond Books, which was the name of the book company. And he did the same thing. He says, oh, well, I want to find out where your books. He finally comes to this street vendor. What do you want to know for? He says, I want to buy a book. Why? You know, this sort of stuff. And it was just impossible. And then eventually I would find out that Elan Computing, with the Steve Anthony guy, owned one of the biggest computer companies in the UK. It was one of the most connected. There was that movie, and I didn't watch the whole movie. I know part of it, Damien, the 666 guy. It was like, you know, as if that was his company. Now, I have nothing bad to say about Steve Anthony because I don't know him. I just had one conversation with him, but he was apparently, you know, so connected that I don't even think David Icke knows about him. You know, I mean, I don't really know if David Icke has written about him or not because I don't follow David Icke, but you know what I'm saying? And that's not my point. My point is that this guy is so, you know, into the hub of things and the importance thing when you talk about computing that I don't think, in other words, he's remained occulted. That's what I'm saying. As David tries to find occult stuff, and I'm saying this guy is more occult than you know, unless I'm mistaken because I haven't followed his work to know. That's my point. You know, well, perhaps, but I think the other point here is that this level of computing was like, it was bridged to this dark occult energy. What I found out about Otto, he's dead now, is that we had this, he just went out of communication with me very weirdly. And he says, I'm so relieved to be in communication with you again. And then I never heard another thing from him. And I found out there was a very dark side reported to me about him. It was so dark that, you know, and people on the outskirts wouldn't necessarily learn about it. So I don't even know if the dark side is true, except that somebody did get in touch. And it's like, you know, Peter Moon wants to get in touch with you. What does he want to get in touch with me for? What is he writing about me now? And he's not writing anything about you. He just would like to get in touch with you because he wrote to you and he didn't hear back. And well, sometimes people just don't write. So it's this like sort of British attitude that is just endemic to the British condition, not with every Brit, but certainly with a percentage of them that represent the power elite or those who fend off the power elite, not even knowingly. So this is, yes, it's best off that I'm not involved with that. You know, I think the witchcraft is a lot of it that gets talked about in the public is a big distraction. And a lot of the groups are a distractive group because, you know, in the Gardnerian witchcraft, you have, this is sort of, is this, what was his name? Lawrence Gardner? And it's sort of like it's a man. Well, witchcraft is a female thing. So, you know, what is, you know, the head witch, you know, you want to go back into the matriarchal traditions of Wicca. And so it gets distorted. And there's a whole history of witches being burned. And we hear about the Jews and being executed, the Inquisition taking people, but we don't hear about the Holocaust of the females. And this is a big sore point with Gaia. So yeah, there's a connection. And the Aleister Crowley did a ritual in 1943, which Amato told me was on the day of the Philadelphia experiment, August 12th. And it was done at Menatol, where they have this donut-shaped stone. There's one that goes to MonTauk. And but see, Cornwall is a big center point. It's one of the most important grids. And I mean, it's just, I've never had time to like take it apart and just do a whole dedicated thing to Cornwall. There's a lot of murders that occurred there that all were in the wake of Aleister Crowley's presence there. There was a book written on it. I forget the name of the book, but the author was Paul Newman, which caused me to look into the actor Paul Newman, which led me to discover that he was the owner of the biggest S&M club in Hollywood, LA. You know, the actor Paul Newman, and there was a whole secret side to his life you never hear about because he had the pretty marriage to Joanne Woodward. This was all public relations, excellent public relations. He figured out the PR game. He came out of a stable of young homosexuals in the 1950s connected to Tennessee Williams. And you see him appearing in these Tennessee Williams movies. So Paul Newman, and so he's never really been known as a homosexual in the press. But I think I first learned of it when the New York Post hated him with a passion. They used to just really rip him to shreds, mostly attacking his height, not his sexuality. And they'd write whole articles about how he's really not 5'10", like he says. He's really 5'8". And then they'd have an article 2 weeks later. It says he's not really 5'8". He's 5'6", and he's wearing heels. I mean, this was really funny. Like a list. They would just attack Paul Newman, and it was so bizarre. Like, why are they attacking this guy? This is the evidence of a polluted part on the grid where the feminine has been desecrated. Now there's a phallic stone and a donut stone. That's a male and female of the balance. So basically, and this character was doing this ritual around there, and it had to be incredibly male oriented and was not balanced. And I knew who the guy was, but I really knew not much about him other than that he thought he was a super soldier, and he was in the intelligence community, and I just wasn't that interested because this is like more diarrhea of information to me. But and I wouldn't say he wasn't in those projects. It's just, but it wasn't very, I guess, coming out very sanely, as most of them don't. But in any case, he's doing all this sort of imbalanced rituals, and this is not a good thing. When one goes to a sacred site, one should breathe. One should do qigong, which means breath work, put spirit into the area. Now, you could have different people that are on the up and up. Any sort of energy into that is going to be positive. But it sounds to me from what you're saying, you'd be prepared to get your socks knocked off if you go there. Sure. And I believe Marconi did those transmissions from MonTauk. So there is a heritage there. There's an earlier legacy, but there is if she would want to go on, there's somebody I could recommend you to who knows she lives right there in Cornwall, and she could give a whole diatribe. Wow. And one of the things that I've learned from her is that, but he funds his whole private money from there. And there's a whole bunch of misappropriations that he's guilty of. And that Cornwall is funding so much of what goes on in his world. Wow. So, and then of course, Prince Charles is also according to the Romanian press, is slated to be the next king of Romania. When King Michael is about 94 years old, and when he dies, because he has all this property in Transylvania, and there's constant rumors that he will abdicate the throne if Queen Elizabeth dies, give it to his son, and then he will go be the king of Romania because of all of its esoteric. They don't say because of its esoteric, but this is something that would be very interesting to see if it happens. Say the Sphinx was put up 50,000 years ago, and they try to penetrate the secrets of these time travel archives underneath, which are bioresonant. They get stopped. In other words, the people who created them don't let you look, and you can't look at who built them. You can look at everything else, but you can't look at who built them. So you're always playing in games of censorship on any level of the universe that you get into.